The Sterling estate in Martha's Vineyard didn't just look like money, it smelled like it. The air was a heavy, suffocating blend of expensive floor wax, aged mahogany, and the salty Atlantic breeze that swept through the open terrace doors. For 3 years this house had been my prison. Every time I walked through those double oak doors, I felt the eyes of the ancestors staring down at me from oil paintings. Black aristocrats, judges, and shipping magnates who seemed to demand what a nobody, like Marcus Vance, was doing in their sacred halls. Tonight the dining table was set with the family's imperial china. The gold trim on the plates caught the flickering light of the candles, casting long dancing shadows across the faces of the people who hated me. At the head of the table sat Arthur Sterling. He was a man built of granite and ego, his hair perfectly silver, his suit tailored by hands in London that only worked for kings. To his right was Beatrice, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes, which were always busy scanning my clothes for a loose thread or a cheap brand. And then there was Sarah, my wife. Sarah was beautiful in a way that felt like a sharp edge. Tonight she wore a dress that cost more than my first car, but her expression was one of exhausted disappointment. She wouldn't look at me. Beside her sat the guest of honor, Julian Thorne. Julian was the man Arthur had wanted for Sarah. He was the son of a banking dynasty, a man who spoke in carryovers and dividends. He leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of 1945 Rothschild, looking at me as if I were a smudge on a masterpiece. "You know, Marcus," Arthur began, his voice a deep theatrical baritone that commanded the room, "I've always admired your persistence. Most men with a failing logistics company and a mounting pile of debt would have had the grace to bow out by now. They would have realized that they are simply out of their depth." "My company isn't failing, Arthur," I said quietly, keeping my voice steady. I picked up my wineglass, noticing the slight chip in the rim. Even the glassware in this house seemed to reject me. "We've been restructuring. Growth takes time when you're building from the ground up without a trust fund." The table erupted in sharp, condescending laughter. Beatrice leaned forward, her diamonds rattling against the silk tablecloth. "Oh, listen to him. Sarah. Growth. He talks as if he's planting a garden in the backyard. Marcus, dear, we don't grow things in this family. We acquire them. We dominate them. And frankly, your garden has been brown and dying for 3 years." "Dad is right, Marcus," Sarah finally whispered, her voice cracking. I'm tired. I'm tired of the whispers at the country club. I'm tired of my friends asking why my husband drives a 5-year-old Toyota when we own a stake in the most prestigious firm on the East Coast. It's embarrassing." The word embarrassing hit me harder than any of Arthur's insults. I looked at her, the woman I had stayed up with until 4 a.m., when she was stressed about her law exams. The woman I had supported when her own father told her she wasn't ruthless enough for the family business. She had traded my loyalty for the approval of a room full of vultures. "So, what is this dinner really about, Arthur?" I asked, setting my glass down. "You didn't invite me here to discuss my vehicle's age." Arthur's smile was predatory. He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and pulled out a sleek, white envelope. He didn't hand it to me. He tossed it. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right against my hand. "That," Arthur said, "is your exit strategy. Inside is a check for $100,000 and a set of divorce papers, already signed by Sarah. It's more than you're worth, but I consider it a nuisance fee to get you out of my daughter's life and away from the Sterling name." "A nuisance fee," I repeated, my blood beginning to boil, though I kept my face a mask of indifference. "Tomorrow morning," Julian chimed in, his voice oily and smug, "Sterling Global is finalizing a $2 billion merger with Nexus Titan. It's the largest logistics acquisition in the history of this country. When that deal closes, Sarah will be the vice president of a global powerhouse. We can't have a consultant with a sub-600 credit score dragging down the brand during the press conference." "Julian is going to be my co-chair," Arthur added, looking at Julian with the pride he never showed me. He brought the Nexus Titan scouts to the table. "He's the son I actually wanted. So, be a good boy, Marcus. Sign the papers, take the money, and go find a nice little apartment in the city. Maybe you can start a delivery service with that Toyota." I looked down at the envelope. For 3 years I had played this role. I had been the broke husband, the silent partner, the man who let them talk because I wanted to see who they really were. I had wanted to know if Sarah loved the man or the empire. Tonight I had my answer. But they didn't know about the blacked-out office in downtown Manhattan where I spent my nights. They didn't know about the encrypted servers or the fact that Nexus Titan wasn't a group of investors. It was a shell company I had built from the shadows, funded by the patents I'd sold secretly years ago. I was the Titan, and I was about to crush them. You're very confident about this merger. Arthur, I said, my voice dropping an octave. The room seemed to grow colder. You've leveraged everything, haven't you? The Sterling estate, the secondary holdings, even the family's private art collection. You put it all up as collateral to clear your debts for the Nexus auditors. Arthur's eyes narrowed. How do you know about our collateral? I know that if this deal doesn't go through by noon tomorrow, I continued. Ignoring his question, the banks will move in. Sterling Global will be dismantled. You'll be left with nothing but the clothes on your back. The deal is going through, Julian snapped, leaning forward. I've spoken to the intermediaries. Nexus Titan is hungry for our infrastructure. They've already sent the initial contract. It's a sure thing. Is it? I reached into my briefcase, which I had kept at my feet. I pulled out a heavy, leather-bound folder. The logo on the front was a silver geometric phoenix, the seal of Nexus Titan. The table went dead silent. Where did you get that? Arthur demanded, his voice trembling for the first time. That's proprietary material. Did you steal that from my study? I didn't steal it, Arthur, I said, opening the folder. I pulled out a document with a gold leaf border. This is the $15 billion contract you've been praying for. But you should have read the fine print in the preliminary agreement. Specifically, the character and moral standing clause. I stood up, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt the full weight of my power. I wasn't the broken son-in-law anymore. I was the man who owned their lives. You see, Nexus Titan doesn't just buy assets, I said, walking around the table toward Arthur. We buy legacies. And I've spent the last 3 years auditing yours. I've watched you belittle your staff. I've watched you cook the books to hide your losses. And tonight, I've watched you try to buy off a man's dignity for the price of a mid-sized sedan. I threw the contract onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud, splashing red wine onto the white paper. Look at the signature line for the CEO of Nexus Titan, Arthur. Look closely. Arthur grabbed his reading glasses, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped them. He looked at the name written in bold, elegant script. Marcus Vance. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room. Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Julian's face turned a translucent shade of white, and Sarah finally looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and realization. No, Arthur whispered. No, this is impossible. You're Marcus. You're a nobody from nowhere. I was a nobody who gave you a chance, I said, leaning over him, my face inches from his. I married your daughter because I loved her, not your name. I stayed quiet while you insulted me, because I wanted to see if there was a single ounce of integrity in this family. I was going to use Nexus to save you, Arthur. I was going to turn Sterling Global into a Titan. I picked up the $100,000 check he had given me and slowly, deliberately tore it into tiny pieces, letting them fall onto his lamb like snow. But tonight, you showed me that you don't deserve a Titan. You deserve to be a memory. Marcus, honey, Sarah started, reaching for my hand. I didn't know. I was stressed. We can fix this. I pulled my hand away. You weren't stressed, Sarah. You were ashamed. And now, you have something real to be ashamed of. I turned to the door. Oh, and Julian? I wouldn't worry about that co-chair position. I've already sent a formal notice to your father's bank. As of 5 minutes ago, Nexus Titan has initiated a hostile takeover of your family's outstanding loans as well. By the time the sun comes up, you'll be looking for a job. I hear my old logistics company is hiring drivers, but you'll need a better attitude. As I walked out of the room, the screaming started. Arthur was yelling at Julian. Beatrice was sobbing. Sarah was calling my name, but I didn't stop. I walked out into the night air, where a blacked-out Maybach was waiting at the curb. The driver opened the door. Everything's settled, Mr. Vance. Not yet, I said, looking back at the glowing windows of the mansion. We've only just started the liquidation. But as the car pulled away, my phone buzzed. It was a high-priority alert from my security team. Someone had been tracking my account, someone within Nexus. Titan, the betrayal at the dinner table, was just the beginning. There was a mole in my empire, and they had just handed Arthur a weapon I didn't know he had. The Maybach glided away from the Sterling estate, the tires crunching over the gravel driveway like the grinding of bones inside the cabin. The atmosphere was a stark contrast to the chaos I had left behind. It was silent, filtered, and smelled of expensive leather and old power. But the weight on my chest wasn't gone. It had merely shifted. I looked at my phone. The alert was pulsing a steady, rhythmic red. Security breach. Sector 7. Internal access detected. Sector 7 was where the private ledgers for the Sterling acquisition were kept, the digital paper trail that proved I had used Nexus Titan to systematically dismantle Arthur's holdings. If someone had breached that sector, they didn't just have my data. They had a roadmap of how I'd bypassed federal banking regulations to squeeze Arthur out. Take the long route back to the city, I told the driver, Elias, and keep an eye on the rear view. Understood, Mr. Vance, he replied, his voice a calm anchor. Elias had been with my father before he passed, and he was the only person who knew that Marcus, the broke husband, and Marcus the Titan were the same man. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and my mind drifted back to the dinner table. The look on Sarah's face, that sudden, frantic shift from disdain to devotion burned in my mind. She hadn't seen a man she loved. She had seen a life raft. And Arthur. Arthur's eyes hadn't just shown fear. There was a spark of something else, a realization. He was a snake, and snakes don't die just because you step on their tail. They wait for you to look away so they can strike the heel. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. You think you're the only one playing the long game? Check the offshore escrow for the Sterling debt. You didn't buy it. You borrowed it. My blood turned to ice. I opened the encrypted banking app, my fingers flying across the screen. I dug through the layers of shell companies, Vance Holdings, Aegis Group, Nexus Alpha. When I reached the primary escrow account, the one that was supposed to hold the 51% of Sterling Global's debt I had purchased, I saw it. The balance was zero. The funds had been moved 60 seconds after I walked out of that dining room. The debt hadn't been retired. It had been transferred to a new creditor. I looked at the routing header of the recipient. Thorn Financial Services. Julian. That smug, wine-swirling puppet hadn't been a guest at the table. He had been the trap. The city skyline loomed ahead, a jagged crown of glass and light. But I didn't feel like a king. I felt like a man who had walked into a room thinking he was the lion, only to realize the room was a cage. Elias, cancel the liquidation order, I snapped. Sir, just do it. If we liquidate now, we're selling assets we don't technically own anymore. It'll trigger a fraud investigation that will bury Nexus Titan before the markets open. I pulled out a second phone, the one I used for the dirty side of the business. I dialed a number that wasn't in any directory. I need a trace on a Thorn Financial wire, I said as soon as the line picked up. No greeting, no pleasantries. They just intercepted the Sterling debt package. I want to know who signed the authorization on our end. Marcus. The voice on the other end was raspy, the sound of a man who had smoked too many cigarettes in too many dark rooms. It was Silas, my head of internal security. I was just about to call you. The authorization didn't come from the executive suite. It came from a private terminal. Whose? There was a pause. A long, agonizing silence that made the hum of the Maybach's engine feel like a roar. It came from your home office, Marcus. The one in the house you share with Sarah. I felt the air leave my lungs. I hadn't used that terminal in months. It was a decoy. A way to keep my real work separate from the life I was trying to build with her. But the encryption keys were stored there in a physical hardware wallet hidden behind a false panel in the desk. Sarah. She hadn't just been a silent witness to my humiliation. She had been the spy. While I was playing the part of the struggling husband, she had been hunting for the truth, not because she wanted to support me, but because she was reporting back to her father, or worse, to Julian. Silas, get to the house, I commanded, my voice trembling with a cocktail of rage and heartbreak. If she's still there, do not let her leave. And find that hardware wallet. I'm already 5 minutes out, Silas said. I hung up and stared out the window. The betrayal felt like a physical weight, a dull ache in my chest that no amount of money could soothe. I had spent 3 years protecting her, keeping her away from the ugliness of the corporate world, only to find out she was the architect of my potential ruin. The car pulled up to my secret, headquarters, a nondescript, converted warehouse in Brooklyn that looked like a ruin from the outside but housed a Tier 4 data center on the inside. I stepped out, the cool night air hitting my face, but it didn't wake me up from the nightmare. As I entered the command center, the screens were a blur of scrolling data. My team, the shadow cabinet as I called them, were hunched over their desks, their faces pale in the glow of the monitors. Status report, I barked. A young woman named Maya, a genius-level coder I'd recruited from MIT, looked up. It's bad, Marcus. The Thorn acquisition of the debt has triggered a cross-default clause. Since Nexus Titan used that debt as leverage for our other holdings, the banks are calling in everything. We have 4 hours before the margin calls hit. If we don't find $8 billion in liquid capital by 9 a.m., Nexus Titan is dead. I walked to the center of the room, staring at the giant map of my empire. It was a sprawling web of logistics, tech, and real estate, and it was all being pulled apart by a single thread Sarah had pulled. "Where's Julian?" I asked. "He's at the Sterling estate," Maya replied, typing furiously. "He never left. In fact, our drones show more cars arriving. It looks like they're celebrating." A cold, dark smile spread across my face. They were celebrating. They thought they had won. They thought they had caught the Titan in a web of his own making. "They think I'm playing by the rules," I whispered. "They think this is a bank play, isn't it?" Silas's voice came over the intercom. He was at my house. "Marcus, I'm in the office. The hardware wallet is gone. And so is Sarah, but she left something for you." "What?" "A note on the desk. It just says, 'A Sterling always pays her debts. You should have known better than to think you could own us.'" I closed my eyes for a second, letting the pain wash over me, then pushed it down into a deep, dark well. I didn't have time for grief. I had an empire to save and a family to bury. "Maya," I said, my voice as sharp as a diamond, "activate the Icarus protocol." The room went silent. The Icarus protocol was the nuclear option. It was a scorched earth strategy designed to crash the value of every asset I owned, dragging my creditors down with me. It was a suicide mission for a company. "Marcus, if you do that, you'll be broke for real this time," Maya warned. "You'll lose everything. The patents, the real estate, the Maybach, everything." "I was broke for 3 years at that dinner table," I said, turning to look at her. "I learned how to survive in the dark." "Arthur and Julian? They've never spent a day without a safety net. If I crash this plane, I'm the only one who knows how to use a parachute." I grabbed my coat. "Keep the screens active. I'm going back to the estate." "You're going back there?" "They have security, Marcus. They'll have you arrested for trespassing." "I'm not going as the CEO of Nexus Titan," I said, checking the silenced pistol in my waistband, a relic of a life I'd tried to leave behind. "I'm going as the husband who was promised until death do us part." The drive back to Martha's Vineyard felt like a descent into hell. The fog had rolled in off the Atlantic, swallowing the road. By the time the gates of the Sterling estate appeared through the mist, the sun was just beginning to hint at the horizon, a pale, sickly yellow. I didn't use the gate code. I drove the Maybach straight through the wrought iron fence, the sound of tearing metal echoing like a gunshot in the morning air. I stepped out of the car before it had even stopped rolling. The house was lit up like a Christmas tree. I could hear music and the clinking of glasses. They were having breakfast. A victory brunch. I walked up the front steps, my footsteps heavy and deliberate. The front doors were locked, but a single kick to the ornate handle sent them flying open. I walked into the foyer. Arthur was there, a silk robe over his suit, a glass of mimosa in his hand. Beatrice was beside him, looking smug. And there, standing by the fireplace, was Sarah. She was holding the hardware wallet and my life's work like a trophy. And next to her, his arm around her waist, was Julian. "Marcus," Arthur shouted, though he didn't look surprised. He looked delighted. I was wondering when you'd show up to beg for your life. I'm not here to beg, Arthur, I said, my voice echoing in the marble hall. I looked at Sarah. Did you do it for the money, or just because you hated that I was smarter than you? Sarah didn't flinch. I did it because you lied to me, Marcus. You played a character for 3 years. You made me feel like I was the one with the power, while you were secretly pulling the strings. You didn't love me. You were just studying me. I loved you enough to save your father from prison, I said. Because that's what's in those ledgers, Sarah. It's not just my business. It's the proof that Arthur has been laundering money through the Savannah warehouses for a decade. The smile vanished from Arthur's face. He looked at Julian, then back at me. You're bluffing, Julian said, stepping forward. We've seen the ledgers. It's all Nexus Titan data. You saw the top layer, I said, pulling a small remote from my pocket. The hardware wallet Sarah stole? It has a GPS-linked Deadman switch. If it's more than 500 yards from my person for more than 6 hours, it doesn't just lock. It broadcasts the encrypted contents to the SEC, the IRS, and the FBI. I looked at my watch. You have 3 minutes before the broadcast begins. The room went cold. Julian grabbed the wallet from Sarah's hand, his face pale. He's lying. He's trying to scare us into giving it back. Am I? I asked. Check the status light on the side, Julian. Is it blue? Julian looked. His breath hitched. It is blinking red. That's the upload timer, I said. 3 minutes, Arthur. In 3 minutes. The Sterling name won't just be embarrassing, it'll be a federal case. You'll lose the house, the company, and your freedom. And since Julian's firm just bought your debt, he'll be tied to the money laundering too. Arthur turned on Julian, his face a mask of fury. You said this was a clean grab. You said he was neutralized. I didn't know. Julian stammered, backing away. I walked toward them, the power shift so palpable that Beatrice actually retreated into the shadows of the dining room. I stopped in front of Sarah. You wanted to be a Sterling so badly, I said, my voice a whisper of pure venom. Now you get to see what that really means. It means being the first one thrown overboard when the ship starts to sink. I looked at Arthur. There's only one way to stop the broadcast. I need the hardware wallet back. And I need a signed confession of the Thorne-Sterling collusion to defraud Nexus Titan. Now, and if we give it to you? Arthur asked, his voice broken. Then I'll stop the timer, I said. And I'll let you keep the $100,000 you tried to give me. You're going to need it for the bus. But as Arthur reached for a pen, a new sound filled the room. It wasn't the jazz music. It was the sound of heavy boots on the marble floor. I turned around. The men entering the house weren't my security. And they weren't the police. They were wearing tactical gear with no insignia. And they were carrying high-caliber rifles. A man stepped through the middle of them. He was older than Arthur. With a face that looked like it had been carved out of a mountain, he looked at the hardware wallet in Julian's hand, then at me. Mr. Vance, the man said, his voice like grinding stones. You've been a very difficult man to find. My name is Silas Thorne, Julian's father, and I think it's time we stop talking about mergers and start talking about my son's inheritance. He looked at the tactical team. Kill him and take the wallet. I don't care about the broadcast. I own the people who receive it. I looked at Sarah. She looked at the guns, then at me, and in that split second I saw the truth. She hadn't been the spy. She had been the bait. And I had just walked right into the middle of a war one wasn't prepared to fight. The presence of Silas Thorne didn't just change the game. It ended the world as Arthur Sterling knew it. The tactical team fanned out with a chilling mechanical precision, their boots thudding against the marble floors like the drums of a funeral march. They ignored the fine art and the gold leaf molding. They were here for the assets, and I was the only asset left that breathed. Arthur, usually a man of booming authority, looked like a child standing in the shadow of a mountain. He realized too late that while he was playing a game of social status and corporate chess, the Thorns were playing a game of conquest and elimination. Silas, Arthur stammered, his voice thin. We had an agreement. We were going to combine the lineages. Julian and Sarah. My son is a fool who lost $1 billion debt package at a dinner table. Silas Thorne interrupted, his gaze never leaving mine. He didn't even look at Julian, who stood frozen, the hardware wallet trembling in his hand. And your daughter is a traitor who couldn't even manage her own husband. The sterling name is a carcass, Arthur. I'm just here to harvest the organs. He turned his focus back to me. Marcus Vance, or should I call you the Titan? You've done something remarkable. You built a shadow empire in the middle of a spotlight. But you made the one mistake a billionaire can never afford. You stayed human. You stayed for her. He gestured vaguely toward Sarah, who was backed against the fireplace, her face a mask of dawning horror. Kill him, Silas said again, his tone bored, as if he were ordering a coffee. And someone grabbed that wallet before the boy drops it. One of the tactical team members stepped forward, the barrel of his rifle leveling with my chest. The world slowed down. I could see the glint of the firing pin, the cold sweat on Julian's brow, and the sudden, desperate flicker in Sarah's eyes. "Wait!" Sarah screamed, stepping between me and the gunman. The room held its breath. The gunman didn't lower his weapon, but he paused, waiting for Silas's command. "Sarah, move," Arthur hissed, though he made no move to help her. "No!" she shouted, her voice echoing in the hall. She looked at Silas Thorne, her chin trembling but her gaze fierce. "You don't understand what's on that drive. Marcus didn't tell you the whole truth. It's not just bank ledgers. It's the biometric keys to the Nexus grid. If Marcus dies, the grid locks. Permanent encryption. You won't just lose the $15 billion, you'll lose every Thorne account linked to the global logistics network. You'll be as broke as you think he is." I looked at her, stunned. It was a liar, brilliant, high-stakes bluff. There was no biometric lock on the grid. But in this room of greed and paranoia, it was the only shield that could work. She was using the very thing they worshipped, money, to save my life. Silas Thorne tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "Is that true, Marcus?" I didn't hesitate. I allowed a cold, arrogant smirk to cross my face. "Why do you think I walked in here alone, Silas? I'm the heartbeat of that company. Literally, if my pulse stops, the money evaporates. You can own the world, but you'll be owning a pile of digital ash." Silas stared at me for a long, agonizing minute. The air in the foyer was so thin I felt I might faint. Finally, he gave a sharp flick of his wrist. The gunman lowered his rifle, though he kept his finger on the trigger. "Check the drive," Silas commanded Julian. "I can't," Julian cried. "It's still on the countdown. It's going to broadcast in 60 seconds. Then Marcus is going to stop it," Silas said, stepping closer to me. The scent of gunpowder and expensive cologne rolled off him. "Stop the timer, Marcus. Then we'll discuss how you're going to transfer the Nexus grid to my name in exchange for a quiet retirement. And your wife's life." I looked at Sarah. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't see the woman who was ashamed of my shoes or my car. I saw the woman I had married. The one who was smarter than everyone else in the room. She had betrayed me, yes, but in this moment, she was the only reason I was still breathing. "Give me the wallet," I said. Julian, hesitant, looked at his father. Silas nodded. Julian practically threw the device at me. I caught it, my fingers immediately finding the hidden sensors. I didn't stop the timer. Instead, I entered a code that triggered the second phase of the Icarus protocol. On the large smart TV in the hallway, the stock market ticker for the morning opening began to scroll. Breaking. Nexus Titan declares insolvency. Global logistics crisis imminent. "What did you do?" Silas roared, lunging for me. The tactical team moved, but I was already backing toward the shattered front doors. I didn't stop the timer. "Silas!" I shouted over the sudden sirens beginning to wail from the gatehouse. I accelerated it. "But it's not broadcasting to the FBI. It's broadcasting to the open market. I've just shorted every single one of your holdings. By the time your men pull the trigger, the Thorne Empire will be worth less than the dirt under my boots. Kill him!" Silas screamed, his face turning a dark, bruised purple. "Marcus, run," Sarah yelled, as the first shot rang out, shattering a Ming vase next to my head. I didn't run for the car. I grabbed Sarah's hand. "If we're going down," I whispered into the chaos, "we're going down together." We dove through the doors just as a hail of bullets tore into the wood. The mist was thick, a white shroud that swallowed us as we hit the grass. Behind us, the Sterling mansion, the site of my humiliation, and my revenge was erupting into a war zone. But as we scrambled toward the tree line, I realized the Icarus protocol hadn't just crashed the market. It had unlocked something else. A file I had hidden even from myself. A file that proved Silas Thorne wasn't just a rival. He was the man who had murdered my father. The revenge arc wasn't over. It had just reached the $15 billion mark. The woods surrounding the Sterling estate were a labyrinth of salt-stunted pines and jagged rocks, but I knew them better than any of the men chasing us. For 3 years I had walked these trails alone, planning for a day I hoped would never come. Sarah was breathing hard, her silk dress torn and stained with mud, but she didn't complain. She gripped my hand with a strength I didn't know she possessed. We could hear the tactical teams behind us, the barking of commands and the rhythmic crashing of brush. "Why did you save me?" I whispered as we crouched behind a granite outcropping, the fog swirling around us like ghosts. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wet with tears. "Because I was a coward, Marcus. I let my father and Julian convince me that you were the one holding me back. They told me you were a parasite. But when I saw you stand up to them tonight, when I saw the man you actually were, I realized I was the one who was small. I didn't want the money, Marcus. I wanted the man I thought I married. I just didn't realize he was a king. A king with no kingdom," I said, checking the battery on the hardware wallet. "I just crashed the global economy to save our necks. Silas Thorne is going to hunt us to the ends of the earth. Then we go to the one place he can't follow," Sarah said, her voice steadying. "The Savannah warehouses." I froze. "How do you know about Savannah?" "I told you I was a spy," she said, a sad smile touching her lips. "But I didn't just look at your bank accounts. I looked at your history. My father has been using those warehouses for years, but he doesn't know what's underneath them. You do." She was right. Underneath the old Sterling logistics hub in Savannah was a cold warrior bunker my father had converted into a private data vault. It was the black box, the heart of the Vance legacy. It was the only place with a hardline connection that could override the Icarus protocol and, more importantly, it held the original documents that could link Silas Thorne to my father's accident 20 years ago. "We have to get to the airfield," I said. "I have a plane waiting in a private hangar 3 miles from here. They'll be watching the roads," Sarah warned. "We aren't taking the roads." We moved through the shadows, avoiding the sweeps of flashlights that sliced through the fog. I led her to a hidden boathouse on the edge of the property. Inside was a low-profile, high-speed interceptor. Boater, another consulting expense the Sterlings had mocked me for. "Get in," I commanded. As the engine purred to life, a low, ominous rumble. I saw a shape emerge from the mist on the pier. It was Julian. He was alone, his face twisted with a mixture of rage and desperation. He held a pistol in a shaky hand. "Marcus," he screamed. "Give it back. Give me the wallet or I'll kill her." I didn't reach for my gun. I didn't have to. "Julian," I said, my voice carrying over the water, "your father just realized you let the Titan escape with the only thing that can save his fortune. Do you really think he's going to let you live if you come back empty-handed?" Julian wavered. The gun lowered an inch. In that world, loyalty was only as thick as a paycheck, and his father's check had just bounced. "Join us, or stay here and face the man who raised you," I said. "Choose fast." Julian looked back at the mansion, where the lights of the tactical teams were closing in. He looked at the boat. With a curse, he tossed the gun into the water and scrambled onto the deck just as I slammed the throttle forward. The boat roared into the Atlantic, leaving the Sterling estate in our old lives in a wake of white foam and broken dreams. But as the shoreline vanished into the dark, Julian turned to me, his face pale. "You think Savannah is safe?" "Marcus, my father didn't just send a tactical team to the house. He's already in Savannah. He's been waiting for you to lead him to the black box for 20 years. I looked at the horizon, where the first light of dawn was breaking through the clouds. The humiliation was over. The game was revealed. Now it was a race for the soul of an empire. The interceptor boat sliced through the black Atlantic swells. The spray hit in my face like shards of ice. Beside me, Sarah was huddled in a survival blanket, her eyes fixed on the retreating shoreline of Martha's Vineyard. In the cramped cabin, Julian sat on the floor, looking less like a banking heir and more like a ghost. He was shivering, his designer loafers ruined by salt water, his world reduced to the vibrations of a hull he didn't understand. "You're lying," I said, my voice barely audible over the roar of the twin engines. I didn't turn to look at Julian. My hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Your father doesn't know about the black box, no one does. He knew your father, Marcus. Julian shouted back, his voice cracking with hysteria. You think you're the only one who can keep a secret? Silas didn't just want a merger. He wanted the Vance encryption algorithms. He's been tracking the seismic activity under those Savannah warehouses for 5 years. He knew there was a void in the earth, he just didn't have the key to open the vault. Why do you think he pushed so hard for me to marry Sarah? It wasn't for the sterling name. It was to get close to the man who held the Vance bloodline. I felt a cold pit form in my stomach. All those years I thought I was being clever, hiding in plain sight as the broke husband. I might have been exactly where Silas Thorne wanted me, under his microscope. Marcus, Sarah whispered, moving toward me. If he's already there, we're walking into a trap. We're not walking, I said, checking the GPS. We're flying. The private hangar was tucked away in a rural strip of land in South Carolina. We had ditched the boat 10 miles up the coast and taken a pre-positioned motorcycle to the airfield. By the time we reached the Vance wing, a small, unremarkable hangar, sun was high and the humidity of the south was beginning to settle in like a heavy wet towel. Inside the hangar sat a Gulfstream G650, its matte black paint absorbing the light. My flight crew was already on board, the turbines whining as they prepped for an emergency takeoff. Get in, I told Sarah and Julian, as we leveled off at 30,000 feet. I opened the hardware wallet and connected it to the plane's secure uplink. The screens in the cabin flickered to life. The global markets were in a free fall. The Icarus protocol had worked too well. The Thorne and Sterling names were being dragged through the dirt of every major news outlet. CNN was reporting a total collapse of logistics leadership, and the SEC had already frozen Arthur Sterling's personal accounts. You've destroyed us, Julian muttered, staring at a screen showing his father's net worth plummeting by the billions in real time. You've turned us into pariahs. I didn't do that, Julian, I said, not looking up from the code I was writing. Your greed did. I just gave it a shove. Marcus, Sarah said, pointing to the secondary monitor. Look, a live feed from a drone I had stationed over the Savannah warehouse showed a fleet of black SUVs surrounding the perimeter. Men in tactical gear. Silas's private army was setting up perimeter sensors. But they weren't trying to break in. They were waiting. He's waiting for the owner, I realized. The vault is biometric. It doesn't just need the hardware wallet. It needs my DNA to bypass the final failsafe. If they blow the doors, the whole thing self-destructs. Then don't go, Sarah pleaded, grabbing my arm. We have enough money in offshore accounts to disappear forever. Let him have the empty warehouse. It's not just about the money, Sarah, I said, my voice turning hard. In that vault is the black box recording from my father's private jet, the one that malfunctioned. Over the Gulf, I spent 20 years being the broke kid, the loser husband, the nobody, just to get this close to the man who took everything from me. I'm not stopping now. The heart of the empire. We landed in Savannah under the cover of a thunderstorm. The rain was coming down in sheets, a cinematic curtain of water that masked our approach. I didn't go through the front gate. Julian, you're coming with me, I said, checking my weapon. Sarah, stay with the pilots. If I'm not back in 60 minutes, tell the pilot to head for Zurich. Use the codes in the glove box. Marcus, no. I kissed her, a brief, desperate moment of heat amidst the cold rain. I've spent 3 years being the man they wanted me to be. Let me be the man I was born to be for 1 hour. Julian and I moved through the drainage tunnels that led directly under Warehouse 4. The smell of old oil and river silt was overwhelming. We emerged in the basement, a dark, echoing space filled with rusted shipping containers. Stay behind me, I whispered. We reached the heavy, reinforced steel elevator that led to the sublevels. I pressed my palm against a hidden plate in the wall. A thin blue light swept over my skin. Accepted. The elevator descended in total silence. When the doors opened, we weren't in a warehouse anymore. We were in a high-tech sanctuary. The walls were lined with servers, their cooling fans a soft, rhythmic hum. In the center of the room sat a single, mahogany descan exact replica of my father's office. And sitting in my father's chair was Silas Thorne. He was holding a glass of bourbon, looking as relaxed as if he were in his own library. His tactical team stood in the shadows, their rifles aimed at my chest. "You're late, Marcus," Silas said, swirling the ice in his glass. "I expected you an hour ago. I suppose the rain slowed you down." "Dad!" Julian stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Dad, please, Marcus has the broadcast codes. If you kill him, everything goes public." Silas didn't even look at his son. "Julian, you've always been a disappointment. You let a woman and a broke consultant outplay you. Go stand in the corner. The adults are talking." I walked to the center of the room, stopping 10 feet from the desk. "It's over, Silas. The Icarus Protocol has already wiped out your liquidity. You're holding a winning hand in a game that's already been cancelled." "Liquidity is for people who care about the world as it is," Silas said, standing up. He walked around the desk, his presence filling the room. "I care about the world as it will be. With advanced encryption, I can control the flow of every commodity on the planet. I don't need money when I own the supply chain itself." He pointed a finger at the biometric console on the desk. "Open the black box, Marcus. Open it and I'll let Sarah live. I might even let you keep a few million for your consulting fees." "And if I don't?" Silas smiled. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "Then I'll kill Julian first. Then I'll bring your wife down here and let her watch while I peel the skin from your fingers until you touch that pad." "Dad!" Julian gasped. I looked at Silas, then at the console. "You really want to see what's inside? Open it." I stepped up to the desk. My hand hovered over the scanner. I looked at the hidden camera in the corner of the room. I knew my team was watching. I knew the world was watching. "This is for my father," I whispered. I pressed my thumb to the pad. The room didn't open. Instead, a holographic display erupted from the center of the desk. It wasn't a bank ledger. It was a video file, a grainy night vision recording from 20 years ago. In the video, a younger Silas Thorne was seen tampering with the avionics of a private jet. He was laughing. He looked into the camera and said, "The Vance name ends tonight. The Empire belongs to the Thorns." "What is this?" Silas roared, his composure finally breaking. "It's not just a recording, Silas," I said, backing away. "It's a live stream. Every major news network on the planet just received this. Your silent acquisition of the sterling debt. It's now a confession to first-degree murder and corporate espionage." Silas lunged for me, but the doors to the vault hissed open. It wasn't my security. It was the FBI hostage rescue team, their tactical lights blinding as they flooded the room. "Drop the weapon," they screamed. Silas froze. He looked at the screens, seeing his own face, the face of a murderer broadcast to the entire world. He looked at his son, who was staring at him with pure horror. "You," Silas hissed at me. "You destroyed everything for a ghost." "No," I said as the agents tackled him to the floor. "I destroyed everything to show the world who the real broke people are. You have billions, Silas, but you don't have a single soul left." Epilogue. The new dawn. 1 month later, I stood on the balcony of a modest beach house in the Mediterranean. No Maybachs, no private armies, just the sound of the waves and the smell of the salt. The Sterling family was gone. Arthur was in prison for fraud. Beatrice was living in a small 2-bedroom apartment, complaining to anyone who would listen about her lost glory. Julian had turned states, evidence against his father, and was now in a witness protection program, working as an accountant in a town no one had ever heard of. And Sarah? She walked out onto the balcony, wearing a simple linen dress. She looked at peace. "The final audit came in," she said, handing me a tablet. "Nexus Titan has been restructured. The $15 billion is being used to settle the debts of the small companies Arthur tried to crush. The rest, well, the rest is in a trust for the people who actually do the work." "And us?" I asked, pulling her close. "We're broke, remember?" She teased, leaning her head on my shoulder. "At least that's what the tax records say." I smiled, looking out at the horizon. For 3 years I had played a part. I had been humiliated, mocked, and betrayed. But as I held the woman I loved, I realized that the greatest revenge wasn't dropping a $15 billion contract on a table. It was walking away from the table entirely, knowing that I was finally the man I was always meant to be. The Titan was gone, but Marcus Vance was finally home.